Last time we peeled back the curtain on Lizzie Borden's early life, the family tension, the cold atmosphere inside that Fall River home, and the emotional pressure cooker that had been building for years. But today we're diving into the real engine that kept the Borden household running and breaking apart. Money.
Because if you know anything about this case, you know the murders didn't happen in a vacuum. The Borden fortune wasn't just wealth. It was leverage. It was power. And it was the one thing Andrew Borden protected more fiercely than anything else in his life. And when you mix strict financial control with two aging daughters desperate for independence, that's when the real cracks start to show.
So settle in, because to understand the Borden murders, you have to first understand the money that shaped every corner of that house.
I'm Jimbo.
And I'm Dustin.
And this is Dark Discoveries.
Dark Discoveries.
Welcome back to Dark Discoveries. In our last episode, we explored Lizzie Borden's early life, her family structure, the tensions within the household, and the emotional atmosphere that shaped her worldview long before the murders. Today, we're turning our attention to something that shaped the entire Borden family dynamic at an even deeper level: money. If you followed this case before, you know the finances aren't just background noise. They're fuel for almost every theory about motive. The Bordens were wealthy, but lived with restrictions that bordered on harsh. Andrew Borden wasn't just frugal. He ran his home and his daughter's futures with the same strict control he used in his business dealings. Understanding how Andrew earned, guarded, and distributed his wealth will show us why resentment grew, why tensions escalated, and why the daughters felt trapped in ways that went far beyond emotional dissatisfaction.
Exactly. The popular image of Lizzie Borden is often of this privileged young woman who just decided one day to pick up an axe out of greed or anger. But when you really look into the Borden finances and how Andrew managed every penny, you start to understand that the family's wealth wasn't a simple blessing. It was a system of control. Andrew built his fortune through smart, disciplined business decisions, but that same discipline became suffocating at home. Everyone living under his roof operated under his rules, his expectations, and his financial limitations. But when you put all this under a microscope, you start to see how the financial tension and the emotional frustration can intertwine. By the time we get to 1892, those issues are not in the background. They're in the forefront. So in this episode, we're going to peel back another layer and examine the power structures created by the Borden's family wealth.
And Dustin, I think everybody needs to understand that when you say Lizzie Borden, everybody straight goes to the murders, the Lizzie Borden house, the TV show, all that stuff. But a lot of people may not realize the stuff that was happening leading up to the murders and why Lizzie went to trial and all that. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to peel, it's like an onion. We're trying to peel back these layers, a little bit at a time, so we can see what was really at the heart of the matter and maybe even the murders.
Yeah, I want to get through this section here about, Andrew Borden being a self-made man and all this, because I got some stuff I want to throw out there once we get done, because something just doesn't sit right with all. Is it trying to keep a thumb over your daughters because you're overprotective? Who knows what happened in his life to make him that way? Or is there something a little bit deeper and darker going on that we don't know about?
So you think him naming Lizzie after him was bad? I mean, listen to his middle name. So Andrew Jackson Borden himself. So he was named after the president, right? He was born in 1822. Andrew grew up in Fall River long before it became the industrial powerhouse he helped shape. His early life was modest. He didn't come from the wealthy branch of the Borden clan. Instead, he made his own way through grit, business savvy, and relentless practicality. Andrew started as a cabinet maker and a coffin maker. which already placed him in a profession tied closely to the rhythms of life and death. And let's think about it. He was born in 1822, depending on when he started his coffin making. It was probably right around the time of the Civil War.
So that industry maybe dealing with, being on the coffins, you're dealing with dead bodies all the time. Does that are you bringing work home?
You never know.
You're dealing with the dark side of life. And I want to touch on something. I don't know if you want me to yet. I want to touch about something in that coffin making business.
Okay. Just hang on. And I'll let you do it when I get done with this section. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I got this. ADD's popping in and I got to think about it. I'm going to forget it.
So from there, he expanded his efforts into furniture sales and gradually into real estate. His business practices were strategic, but extremely cautious. He didn't take big risks. Instead, he made slow, steady investments in property and bank stock. By the time he reached middle age, he had become president of a bank, a director for multiple companies, and a landlord to numerous tenants. Yet despite this success, Andrew was determined to live simply. No modern conveniences, no lavish purchases, and minimal household spending. To him, financial discipline wasn't just smart, it was moral. But to his daughters, that discipline felt like deprivation.
So I'm going to just throw this out there. If we cover it later, that's my fault for not going through my notes better. So Andrew Jackson Borden was a shrewd businessman. You talked about him making coffins. Do you know what corners he cut to make more money? We kind of talked about this in another case that we had.
What did he do? Reuse the coffins?
He would, it was said that he chopped off the feet of some of the people that were too tall
to get them to fit
a smaller coffin to make more money. So if that is true, that's the kind of person we're dealing with. It may not be just an overbearing parent. I could see him being like, okay, I don't want my daughters to work. They may be a little bit rough in the beginning, but when I die, there's going to be enough for them to have generational wealth to where I instilled this same frugal lifestyle to where they're comfortable, but they're not going to blow through all the money. And like I said, we have generational wealth, so they don't have to work and their kids don't have to work.
Well, two things stand out from that statement you just said. Number one, if he's cutting the feet off, I wonder if he used an axe. Number two, I got three things. Number two, could ultimately his murder be a revenge for him desecrating somebody's human loved ones by cutting off the feet and fitting them in the thing? And number three, I'm not sure he was going to leave them all this wealth anyway. I think it might have been something that was forced upon him. Did he have a will?
As far as I know, no will was found, and without a will, it just goes straight to the stepmom. So when you have a murder, there's three things that you have to have: means, motive, and opportunity. And I think we're going to start talking about that pretty soon. And that distinction really matters because while Andrew's thrift made him wealthy, it also made him nearly impossible to live with. People who knew him described him as honest, fair, but rigid. Not someone easily swayed by emotions or arguments. He avoided debt like the plague and disapproved of anything he viewed as unnecessary. In his mind, comfort was indulgence, and indulgence was weakness. His daughters, Lizzie and Emma, they were aware of the wealth he controlled, but they weren't allowed to enjoy that lifestyle that he could provide. Andrew's habits worked for him in business, but at home, they cost him connection, comfort, and even affection. The house remained outdated, lacking plumbing, the conveniences that the wealthier families and his relatives had adopted for years. For Lizzie and Emma, that meant living in conditions that didn't reflect their social status. And because Andrew viewed his money as something to be guarded fiercely, the daughters had very little anonymity. Is that the right word I want to say?
Autonomy.
Autonomy, sorry. They couldn't make large purchases. They couldn't travel freely. They couldn't choose how to structure their own lives. When a parent tightly controls the purse strings, they often end up controlling much more than money. They control their identity, their opportunities, and their future. That's exactly what was happening in the Borden household.
So it sounds like Andrew, like if they wanted to go on a family vacation, or Lizzie or somebody wanted to go on a vacation, that he would pretty much map every single step, every pit stop, every gas station, everything beforehand. And we weren't dividing from this plan, no matter how bad Dustin wanted to go to that Krispy Kreme donuts up the road, right?
No, it's going to be a little bit better than Krispy. So you talk about vacation. Do we touch upon that a little bit later about the vacation and stuff?
I think so.
Okay, because with the church, she did get some time abroad, but I don't want to spoil anything. So
right. So basically, their family fortune is kind of like captivated by between you have wealth but without freedom, right? So let's break down that paradox. The Bordens were wealthy, but Lizzie and Emma did not experience the freedom or comfort that typically accompanies wealth. While their cousins enjoyed life on the Hill, a prestigious neighborhood filled with the most opulent homes in Fall River, the Borden sisters lived in a modest, constricted house on 2nd Street. How would that make you feel, Dustin? Hey, you think their cousins picked on them a little bit?
Maybe. Kids, especially at a young age, kids are ruthless.
So the home was functional, but it lacked the luxuries and status symbols that defined upper middle class living at that time. Even more importantly, it lacked space. While we talk about little girls especially, they need space as they're going into their teenage years and young adult life. The house structure forced constant proximity and minimal privacy, something already symbolic of emotional repression. Andrew's refusal to modernize wasn't about cost. He had the money. It was about principle. In the Victorian era, a father was expected to provide for daughters, especially unmarried ones. But Andrew's version of providing meant offering the bare minimum while hoarding opportunities they could have had. When you combine that with the social expectations, the unmarried daughters must remain dependent and obedient. You get a lifestyle that can feel claustrophobic. And
the thing is why don't you want your daughters to get married? Because how old was she during this?
You had to ask that. I'm not really sure.
I don't have the number, but they weren't, she was about 30. Like, I feel bad because I should have this off the top of my head, but
let me ask you,
getting older as this happened.
Well, let me ask you a question. Okay. The father didn't want to pay for, extra stuff, but yet they had a maid.
Yeah, exactly. But that benefited. Is that because it benefited his wife?
Or him?
Maybe.
You never know. Right?
So when she killed her family.
If she killed her family there, Dustin, don't be throwing.
Like I said,
no, you said when.
She was around 32. So she's older. Like, you would think you would want your daughter in her 30s, even late 20s, that you would want her to
be out of the house.
And that's where we're talking about the darker side. Why did he not want her out of the house? There's something that just doesn't add up to me. And it just keeps going.
I talk about this in a future episode, but I'm going to go ahead and drop a little spoiler right here. It's a conspiracy when we get to that episode, but was maybe Lizzie?
Well, I know where you're going. Let's not go there yet.
Okay, maybe we'll hold off on that. Well, just stay tuned. We're going to answer some of these questions later.
There's a teaser there. So the Fall River Society noticed all this. People commented on how strange it was that the Borden daughters still lived on the 2nd Street house instead of up on top of the hill with their wealthy relatives. That social divide created embarrassment for the sisters. They were wealthy in name, poor in existence. That gap between what they had and what they were allowed to have, this became one of the psychological wedges within the family. Wealth without freedom is only another form of confinement. The sisters saw their cousins enjoy the life that they felt they were entitled to. Yet, their father kept them tethered to a lifestyle that he considered morally superior, but emotionally punishing. It wasn't simply about wanting nicer things. It was about wanting the dignity, the independence, and the wealth that they could provide. And like I said, independence and respect, that's going to be huge. This was independence that Andrew refused to grant them. When daughters reach adulthood, they're still treated as dependents without agency. The resentment becomes part of daily life. The resentment's one of the key motives historians examine when analyzing the events in 1892.
Do you think if Lizzie and her sister would have been boys, it would have been different?
Look at her middle name. Like, is that you wanted a son
wanted to be a boy,
or you're taking it out on them, or was there just a chip on your shoulder that they picked up? Were they affectionate to their dad and he was affectionate back when they were younger? I don't know, because I think at this time you're not going to show affection like you would today.
You know what? And I don't think I looked this up when I did all my notes, but did Andrew and Abby have any other children after they were married?
I don't believe so. But hey, if you're listening and you know the answer, why don't you just send us an email at darkdiscoveriespod@gmail.com? I've not plugged that in a little while. So shout out to one podcast who, I don't know, maybe we'll have to talk to him. Evil Never Dies, that had to point out one of my little bitty teeny tiny mistakes. But hey, we're glad you listened.
So let's talk about property disputes and the transfer of power. So a few things were rough before. Here we go.
It's hitting a boiling point.
Yep.
And you got to remember, like I said, we're talking about the late 1800s. Man, they're just chafing in this heat outside. You know what I mean?
We're back to the chafing.
It's boiling over. It's hot. It's muggy. It's sticky. There's no AC because, it's not invented yet. So it doesn't take, I think, a whole lot. You're used to it, but it doesn't take a whole lot for that to boil over. And once it boils over, once you squeeze the toothpaste,
you can't put the cap back on, right?
Put the cap back on. You're just going to get it back in the tube.
No, I mean, on like a pressure cooker, that thing's blowing off. So
at least the pressure cooker has a little bleeder valve.
Yep. So property disputes formed one of the biggest fractures in the Borden household. When Andrew brought a home for Abby's sister, the famous, quote, Whitehead House incident, the daughters were furious. To them, it wasn't simply a financial decision. It was straight up betrayal. Lizzie and Emma felt that Abby's relatives were being favored over the Borden daughters. They feared losing their inheritance or watching their future slowly siphoned away to Abby's side of the family. The intensity of their reaction tells us that this wasn't a minor issue. The sisters' frustration grew so severe that Andrew eventually attempted to balance the scales by transferring another property to Emma and Lizzie. But the damage was already done. The daughters no longer viewed Abby as a neutral presence in the household. They saw her as someone who held influence over Andrew, someone who was benefiting while they were held back.
And that property tension is one of the most important precursors to the murders. Victorian women had very few paths for financial independence. Inheritance was one of them. If the daughters believed that their stepmother was being strategically positioned to siphon off property that was meant for the sisters, their futures were threatened. Combine that with their lack of personal freedom, the cramped living conditions, and Andrew's iron fist control, you get a situation where financial anxiety isn't about greed, it's about survival. Another aspect that's added to the tension was the issue of household theft. Items went missing, and Andrew suspected either a servant or possibly a family member. He responded by installing new locks everywhere, creating a literal and symbolic landscape of mistrust. Doors didn't just separate rooms, they separated loyalties. Financial decisions became emotional ones, and emotional wounds became financial fears. And that's for us talking about he had that mistrust. He made sure that they knew he locked their door, like his bedroom area, those areas, with a key, and that key is up on the mantle. So that I know somebody in this house is stealing from us.
Well, here's something else. I kind of have to wonder about this. You think Abby went to him and say, hey, guess what? Your dad bought my sister a new house, and it's up here on the Whitehead or whatever we called it. I mean, she could be part of it. That's just, chipping away and just egging them on a little bit too. But I think they were pretty neutral about her. Like, yeah, she's here, but she's not really bothering us. It's all her dad coveting all that money that he's earned. So, and here's another thing too. Well, did Lizzie ever have a job?
It doesn't sound like it.
That's what I was going to say.
You're talking, at a time where women stayed at home. Their job at this point, I think, was to be silent and not seen. So they're not going to go to the house to make money. So if something happens to their dad and all the money goes to their stepmom, what are they going to do? Because they're going to be kicked out.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to have nowhere to go. They're not going to have any jobs. And they're probably lacking the social skills, which she was in church. And I'm sure we're going to get into that. So she was social, but there's some maturity that's not going to be there to be in those adult situations.
Well, and she was also well known just in public in general as being a really, really polite lady, really well-mannered lady. Everybody seemed to like her. So, of course, money, it's going to become the source of resentment and pressure for Lizzie. So as the years passed, the financial tension in the Borden household began to warp the relationships inside it. Andrew's refusal to offer his daughters the lifestyle equivalent to their wealth created simmering resentment. But the resentment wasn't about vanity. It was about control. Lizzie and Emma recognized that Andrew's tight grip on money was also a tight grip on their autonomy. They were women in their 30s with no power to make choices about their own lives. They couldn't move out. They couldn't manage their own finances. They couldn't marry easily because they bought no dowry reflecting their family's actual wealth. They were trapped in a loop of dependency, and dependence in adulthood often breeds desperation. It's not hard to imagine how that emotional suffocation paired with fears about inheritance being diverted could escalate into something darker. Lizzie wasn't known for outward rebellion, but the pressure of financial stagnation can create internal fractures that aren't visible until they break.
So the one thing I was wanting, and I know I'm a little bit behind on this one, is I think Abby was about 6 years younger than their father. So is there maybe it's only 6 years. So it doesn't seem like that big of a disparity, but do you think the age had a little bit to do with that?
I don't know, man. Back then it was different. Like my great grandpa and my great grandma, they were, she was 14, I believe, when they got married, and he was 19, 21, something like that.
It's not right, but it happened a lot back then.
Oh, yeah. And you know what? They were married their whole lives together. It was just different time, different era, like we say. You know what I mean?
And you have to remember, too, that, you're not going to live as long as we do now. So, I mean, that could be a little bit into it, but it's just trying to figure out things, you're trying to figure out okay, well, my dad's gone. You're going to have all this. You're young enough to enjoy it. Maybe we're diving too deep. Maybe we're thinking too deep, because the mindset that you have in 1892 is going to be different than the mindset you have now.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at the what the historians call the temperature of the house in 1892, you see a household struggling under the invisible weight of money. The resentment wasn't loud. It was quiet. It was simmering, unspoken, but always present. The sisters rarely ate with Andrew and Abby. They avoided each other in the small home, and money played a role in every one of these emotional decisions. When somebody controls your environment entirely, money becomes synonymous with freedom. And the absence of financial freedom becomes kind of an imprisonment. By the summer of 1892, resentment, paranoia, and frustration are woven into the daily fabric of the Borden house. The stage wasn't just set, it was trembling. And when we get closer to the murders themselves, you'll see how the finances connect nearly every theory, every motive, and every bit of the emotional volatility.
Mm-hmm. So, and I'm just thinking, when the murders happened and she's over 30 and still living at home, and her sister's older than her and she's still living at home, I don't understand, because if Andrew wanted them to leave, which we'll talk about in a future episode, I'm sure, why he wouldn't at least give them the dowry that showed their financial status to be married off, so he wouldn't have to worry about them anymore. But like I said, it's a different time, and maybe some things that we'll talk about later as to why he didn't want that to happen. So let's talk about the finances leading into the week of the murders. As we inch toward the fateful week of August 1892, the financial tension is reaching its peak. The daughters were increasingly dissatisfied. Andrew remained steadfast in his old-fashioned ways. Disputes about property lingered unresolved, and what complicates everything even further is that the sisters had recently returned from a long stay in New Bedford. When they came home, the household atmosphere was immediately strained. The divisions were sharper. The resentment was deeper, and the conversations around inheritance and property had become colder and more tense. These weren't minor disagreements. They were emotional fault lines that widened daily. Understanding the financial environment during this time gives us a clearer sense of how volatile the household had become. Money wasn't just a source of tension. It was the lens through which every action, every decision, and every silence was interrupted.
So I don't have exactly where they went off the top of my head, but I do know that this is one of the points where, they were out of the country, I believe, for a while. They were getting that kind of, okay, this is what life could be like if we were not at home. So I really think that if they were the ones that did murder their parents, or well, not them, only Lizzie is suspected of that. Was this where that finally started to boil over to where it's like, okay, I know what life outside of the house is now. I have to get out. So when we examine the evidence from the week of the murder, which we're going to get into a little bit later, probably another episode, we see the conversations about finances happening right up until the killings. Visits from relatives, requests for property transfers, arguments about wills, concerns about, a burglary and a break-in that happened. All of it was happening in the days leading up to the murders, which was August 4th. The more you study the timeline, the clearer it becomes that money wasn't a background detail. We keep harping on that. It was a gravitational force pulling the family dynamic into a total collapse. And when the household is under that much tension, it doesn't take that much to ignite the match. Whether Lizzie acted out of fear, anger, desperation, or just a coincidence that she was the kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time, all the theories hinge on one universal truth. The Borden house was financially and emotionally unstable. And that instability didn't just appear overnight. It was decades in the making.
So today we looked at the Borden fortune from the inside out. We saw how Andrew built his wealth, how he controlled it, and how that control affected the lives of everyone in his household. Money, in this case, isn't just economic. It's psychological. It shaped relationships, created unseen barriers, and set the conditions that would eventually explode into tragedy. As we move forward in this series, this background becomes the backbone for understanding motive, opportunity, and emotional climate.
In the next episode, we're going to dive deeper into the human side of the tension that we've started to explore this episode. We're going to talk about the relationships within the house as they all deteriorated, the arguments, the silent hostility, the mistrust, and the subtle behaviors that signaled a household on the brink of disaster. Understanding the emotional breakdown inside the Borden home is the missing link between the finances we've discussed today and the violent crimes that we're going to be analyzing as we go forward. So stick with us, because in the next episode is where the psychological tensions really begin to spike. And remember, the deeper you dive,
the darker it gets.